109. In terms of the risk assessment process, Ms. Prince noted that it is not scientifically possible to accurately predict whether or not an individual offender will or not reoffend, and that the best that can be afforded is an open quote estimate that is anchored to empirical literature specifying features associated with risk and sound clinical analysis and formulation of how those present features might operate in the individual subject to the assessment, close quote. She explained that the process of risk assessment of violent extremism or politically motivated violence is, open quote, comparatively new, close quote, when compared to the risk assessment for general violent and sexual offending behaviours. She explained that the assessment of risk of violent extremism, open quote, cannot be anchored in the statistical probabilities, and subsequently a numerical score cannot be provided. Rather than overall risk judgment is based on the clinician's assessment of the available information at the time of the assessment, close quote. Clinician probabilities, risk assessment, empirical literature, clinical analysis and formulation, it's quackery. 109 demonstrates to you that the art that is being performed before the court is nothing more than a duck. Quack, 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 quack. It is quackery. This is the dark slope that I mentioned when we discussed this as we followed the rabbit into the hole. And now as we look to the light coming out, we can see that it's a bunch of quacks that have gathered together along with the state and its enforcement bodies in a bid to quash any ideology that may stop you from being a member of the workforce. That's about the sum of it. You shall just be a member of the workforce, because there is also an indication of class determined in this document. Class being the working class. So we can see as we move backwards that this obvious quackery is very apparent. 108. Miss Prince concluded, Mr. K is currently assessed as moderate to high risk for politically motivated violence, violent extremism, or terrorism activities using the VERA. His role would likely be one of a promotion, recruitment, and development of materials which promote the cause. When he would directly or indirectly promote the use of violence to achieve his goals is unclear. However, the emotive language and rhetoric is genuine possibility to be interpreted as a call to arms. Mr. K's risk of grievance-fueled or targeted violence was assessed with the TRAP. This assessment suggests that monitoring and active case management is warranted. This would be best achieved through the application of an ESO with the joint management by the New South Wales High-Risk Terrorism Offenders Team and the Community Corrections Terrorism High-Risk Offenders. Details of recommended intervention and management strategies are outlined at the end of this report. What we can note from this is that Miss Prince works very closely with these teams within either fixated persons or within this high-risk terrorism offenders team. What we can see here is that her words formulated from computers are not her words and not the words of those that she put into those computers. So it's as if the police have said, Miss Prince, go and do a VERA report and a TRAP report so we can use those two reports before the justice. Even though you don't have, and Miss Prince has gone, oh, I don't have any of these documents, I haven't interviewed the offender. Oh, it doesn't matter, just go and do those documents based on what you've got. We need to paint him with this tarred brush. The feathers won't stick if we can't use the brush. 107. From the conclusions expressed in the executive summary, it is evident that Miss Prince based her assessment on a file review only, but rather than simply allowing the fact to speak for itself, Miss Prince goes on to say that her report should be considered an interim assessment only. Mr. K should be engaged in an interview, underlined, to allow for more informed assessment of his current vulnerability, risk profile, and protective factors, emphasis added. So this is as if the doctor has now been pushed by the police to inform the court that he is a risk, but she's not willing to say that in her definite words, but has emphasized, and the court's emphasized back on her, but she has emphasized the need to bring him back in so this can be done, and then also the need to have this interim report considered, even though it doesn't fulfill all the factors that are required of it to be a report. So we can say the same now about trap. We can say that the police have used these tools in a sheer bid to undermine the very premise of this doctrine or belief that they all seem to be fearful of. 106. The reason why the defendant was not made available to her to interview remains unexplained, despite my invitation to Mr. Emmett to explain why the defendant was not interviewed for the report. Well, it's very clear that if they did interview the defendant, the report wouldn't have gone the way that they wanted the report to go. They needed the report to speak a certain voice at which they'd already painted, and if they put that at risk by having the defendant speak for himself, 105. Whilst it is clear that the court must take the evidence relied upon by the plaintiff at its highest, the report of Miss Prince is heavily qualified. On more than 10 occasions within the report, she makes reference to the fact that she has not had an opportunity to engage with the defendant. In a number of respects, she declines to express a view about aspects of the potential risk that he presents. She's more than willing to frame a case on behalf of the state, but she's not willing to put that into her words for fear that she may be called back up for the lack of evidence within her words. And we're talking quackery. We already proved from returning to this in a reverse fashion that this has become complete quackery, and Miss Prince is one of these quacks.